All right, it looks like we are all set. We do have a couple of attendees that are on the call. So Mayor Fadness, if you want to go ahead and kick it off.
Sure. Well, I want to, I'll give it 1 second here. It looks like there's a number of people joining. So I'm going to give it just maybe 2 more minutes here, Megan, to let everybody get on. But we'll just give it 1 or 2 minutes and we'll get started.
Okay.
All right. I think we've got probably as many as we're going to get on the panel tonight. So I want to welcome, frankly, and thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to spend a little time with our staff tonight. Just in ways of introductions, I'm Scott Fadness, your mayor here in the city of Fishers. We also have Megan Bukasich, our planning director, as well as Megan Baumgartner, our community and economic development director. And I see as well tonight as an attendee, but not on the panel, we have your council member, David Giffel, who's also on this Zoom call as well. So he'll be taking an active role listening to what people's questions and concerns might be as we move forward. And he's a representative, and I know he does a lot of good work making sure that he's aware of what's on the minds of residents in his district. So I appreciate, David, you jumping on here as well. I will also say in full transparency that I have 3 little boys, ages 8, 4, and 2. So if you hear someone yelling, or if you see a kid in diapers running across the back screen, that's actually probably my kid. So I apologize ahead of time. I want to provide a little bit of background on this project and then turn it over to Megan Bukasich to really talk about kind of where we go from here. But as many of you may know, and some of you may not know, over 2 years ago, perhaps even longer, the residents at Mapledale gathered together and sought legal representation with the attorney of Churchill and Antrim. And they basically said, we want to collectively go out and sell our homes. We believe that if we go together, we can get more value than if we sold our homes individually. And at that time, a group of developers looked at that and saw an opportunity to potentially redevelop that site as we know it as Mapledale. They started having conversations with the city, and we entered into what we call a land acquisition agreement, which basically said, hey, we're interested in the redevelopment of this site. If we can come up with a project that makes sense for the community, we'll go ahead and enter into an economic development agreement with you. If for some reason that didn't work, the city believes that long-term it's in our interest to have control of this site. So we worked with Hageman Development and JC Hart, if some of you may recall, on developing a project for that area. I think we had an interest in seeing it be somewhat of a neighborhood feel, but had a more density to it than what, let's say, your residential homes around it. And we worked diligently through the economic development project. We had a number of conversations in the neighborhoods about concerns about that site plan, that development plan. We worked through some of those. We heard people's ongoing concerns about just density in general. And ultimately, we ended up with an economic development agreement for that project to move forward. So council voted on it and voted for the economic development contract to move forward, as well as the zoning associated with it. Since that time, it was probably 3 or 4 months after that agreement was signed, the developers notified Megan Baumgartner and I that they had budget overruns in their construction, which wasn't necessarily atypical for what we were seeing in other projects because they were right in the mix of that inflation, but it was higher than what a lot of other projects were coming in at. So there was clearly a discrepancy in their budget. And so they really had 2 kind of questions to the city that they posed. 1, would the city be willing to provide any other additional incentives? And 2, would the city be willing to modify the vision for the project? And so Megan and I evaluated both of those requests. And the first one, asking for additional incentives, we felt was not possible. We were not going to provide any additional financial incentives to the developer at the time to be able to move forward with that project. And throughout the months that ensued, they brought back various site plans and adjustments to the project that, to be honest with you, having listened to the residents in that area and their concerns, we felt as though it was headed in the wrong direction. It wasn't going to alleviate the concerns of residents, but actually may even do more harm or more concern to the residents that live around that area. And so ultimately, earlier this fall, I made the decision to say that I just didn't feel the project was in the best interest of the community at large or the residents around that area to move forward, either from an economic development perspective or from a vision or fit within a surrounding neighborhood. So we notified J.C. Hart and Hageman that we were not going to move forward with their project. And so since we terminated that economic development agreement, the city will now exercise its option to acquire that land. And with that comes the opportunity to really rethink kind of what we want to do on this parcel. What do we want to see develop on this site? I know early on in these conversations, people said, well, just make it a park. The reality is this isn't going to be earmarked for a park. That's not likely to occur. But we do think that there's an opportunity to reimagine based on what we hear from residents about what it is they desire to have as a neighbor. I think we can work together to find some commonalities and some opportunities to really create a project that we can all be excited and proud about. There is no sense of urgency here. I'm not telling you that tomorrow we're going to announce some big development. There is no developer selected at this point to go out and build something. And so with this time affords us the opportunity to really collaborate and work together collectively to come up with a vision that I think, will it be everything that everyone wants? Not likely, but I do think we can find some things that are in our common interests and in the betterment of our community in general. And so Megan Vukasic, our planning director, on a number of occasions in a variety of different settings, has done a really wonderful job trying to facilitate and draw out of residents kind of what it is that they would like to see. She just concluded a pretty successful study on the Allisonville Road corridor, where we really sat down with a lot of our residents, a lot of our stakeholders, and say, what do you want to see here? What type of development do you want to have? Ultimately, if you could, wave a wand and create a new vision for that area, what could it be? And really tonight, what we want to do is go through that exercise with all of you and listen, frankly, more than talk. And then, go back to the drawing board and see what's possible. So first of all, thank you again for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate that. And secondly, in advance, I thank you for what I hope to be are some really thoughtful, insightful comments about what we could do collectively together. The logistics of this are, I think you can submit your questions or responses to Megan through the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer questions and also really solicit feedback with the realization that right now we can't answer in the affirmative any specific project moving forward. We're really here to listen more than anything. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan. I look forward to hearing people's input.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to start off just by giving an overview of what the zoning of this property looks like today. So as Mayor Fadness mentioned, we don't have any proposed development on this site. The previous development is no longer happening. And so what I'm going to go over is just what the zoning is. It's not necessarily what is planned today. Again, this is meant to be more of a conversation about, what are the priorities of the surrounding neighborhoods and their concerns. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to just start with some basic zoning information on this piece of property. So let's see here. Can you guys all see that? Okay, great. So the area in question, this this image here, this is a zoning district map of the downtown area. So downtown Fisher is what we call the Nickel Plate District, is zoned a little bit differently than the rest of the city. And you guys can probably see that with the type of development that we see in that area. And so this downtown Nickel Plate District is really divided into 4 different areas. The blue is our downtown core. So that's where you see like the First Internet Bank building and a lot of the new mixed use developments. We also have the municipal center. So that's where the new city hall is being built. Highway center, that's where the Target is, and more of the traditional strip mall development. And then surrounding the downtown core is what we call Village Center. So that is what is shown in orange here on our screen. And I have the former Maple Dell site identified in red just to place you all on the area that we're talking about. So this is really on the fringe of this Village Center area in our downtown district. And this is a screenshot of the text here from the Nickel Plate District Code that really summarizes what the Village Center is looking to achieve. So it's meant to be the population center to support the downtown. Connectivity is a top priority, so making sure people can walk to the downtown area. And then really to support that downtown vision, a mix of residential building types is what the Village Center envisions. And so that could include multifamily, townhomes, or single family. Now, that's again for the entire Village Center area. That's not necessarily for this parcel, but the zoning today would allow all of those building types. So here's a zoomed in aerial of the area in question. So of course, you're all familiar with Charleston Crossing. And then this Maple Dell development is the piece of property that has the potential to redevelop. And so I'll go back to this as we go through the questions and answers. But I just thought that this might be a good visual for us to all place ourselves as we have this conversation. And then I did want to provide just an overview of what the permitting approval process looks like. So if we select a contractor or developer for this site, what that looks like through the permitting approval process is first they would submit to what is called the Technical Advisory Committee, which is TAC. You might hear that term thrown around at public meetings. And that is really the staff review of any new development. So that's going to be an internal review, but we review any new development for compliance with that zoning code that I previously was referencing. And then any development within the downtown area goes before the Nickel Plate Review Committee. So this is a public meeting. It's held the 4th Wednesday of every month at, I believe, 5 p.m. It's an evening meeting. It is noticed, but you won't receive a notice in the mail. It's just posted online as a public meeting. So, you know, this is something that staff can certainly, because we have ownership stake in this property, will likely notify the residents around there, but that's not a legal requirement. I just want to make that distinction clear, that it's a public meeting, but not necessarily a public hearing. And I can answer any questions on the distinguish between those two, if anyone has any questions.
The only other thing, Megan, if I could just jump in here, because we would own the land outright, there's another approval process that would likely happen in the conveyance of the property, likely through either the redevelopment commission or the town hall building corp, but I think likely the redevelopment commission. So there's a process we would have to go through to sell the land or dedicate that land to some sort of development project. So there would be another approval process beyond just kind of the entitlements that would be required. And then on top of that, if there were any financial incentives involved, there would be yet another opportunity for residents to weigh in, and that would be at the city council level, more than likely.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. So that's really a general overview of the zoning approval process. I would say things that we typically look at with new developments, and this is just for generic developments, not necessarily something that we have ownership in. We look at site access, landscaping, architecture, any signage. If it were a commercial development, we would look at that. So those are the types of regulations that zoning is looking at: the height, the lighting. And so if those are the types of site design features that we'd like to have the conversation on tonight, if you have any concerns or suggestions on what you would like to see for any I would say probably focusing more on the residential side of development for this parcel. But mixed use, I mean, could be a potential as well in the downtown area. So I'm gonna pause here and see if there's any questions just to start off with, but I do have a couple of polls to get us started if not.
Megan, why don't we do the polls and then there's a couple of Q&As that I think we can leave those and start to add those after we do some of these polls.
Okay. So I've got a few polls. So what you'll have a question pop up on your screen. The first one is going to focus on what you would like to see, what's most important to you for any new development. I took a few suggestions just from past experience, but there's also the other option. If there's something not on this question, I'm going to go ahead and launch it now, that you would find most important in a new development. I'd ask that you put it in the chat feature, what that could be. So the options are buffering from Charleston Crossing, that could be landscape buffering, quality of architecture, so what the buildings actually look like, and then tree preservation on the site. Okay, it looks like we've got about 13 out of the 17 participants that have answered. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And then I can share the results with you all. So it looks like the top 71%, so 10 respondents said buffering from Charleston Crossing was the most important. Quality architecture was second, tree preservation third, and then a few of you did select other. Megan, do you see anything in the chat that identifies any of those other features?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, I will say for buffering from Charleston Crossing, so the zoning code does require buffering from this property to the neighborhood Charleston Crossing. So there would be some landscaping requirements that the zoning code would require. If for some reason this development had any deviations from that, they would have to request what we call either a variance or a waiver, and you all would be notified of that. So we certainly would make sure that there is buffering from the residents with any new development.
Megan, do you want to talk a little bit too about the concern about the quality of architecture and some of the steps that we've taken recently to make sure that we're getting the best quality that we can for our community?
Yeah, so quality architecture, definitely one of our top priorities for new development around the entire city, but I would say especially in the downtown Nickel Plate district. It's one of the reasons why we have the Nickel Plate Review Committee, is so that we can have that extra group of individuals looking at the architecture that's going in. But we have recently started working with Verdis Group, which is an architectural consulting firm, to look at the architecture and review that. So on staff, we don't have any certified architects, but working with this group, we are having architects look at anything come through and provide that extra review and any comments to that new development. And so they would certainly be looking at any new development that came in on this parcel as well.
I think some folks have shared in the Q&A that the chat is closed. I'm going to try and open that back up. But if you were one of the individuals who submitted if you want to submit your comments of what was most important for you in the other section, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A section, I'll try and open that chat back up, but you can use the Q&A section at the bottom in the same way.
And then I'll talk a little bit about the tree preservation. on this piece of property, I believe that there are some existing trees. And so anything that's on kind of the perimeter of the site, we could look at preserving. And it's something that we look at for any new development. So that's tree preservation is always something that we ideally would like to do. And it will just depend on what really is realistic for the development on where those trees are currently located. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch the second question. And this one focuses on the top concerns that you have. So again, just like the last one, there's going to be some suggestions. This is based on previous development. But then if there's any thing that's not listed here, feel free to put it in the, it looks like the chat feature, it should be enabled now. So you can add those comments to the chat. But this is asking what your top concern with any new development would be. So we've got here traffic, drainage, lighting, noise, or other. All right, it looks like we've got almost everyone answered. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So traffic was identified as the top concern. We do hear that often, especially on 116th, which is a heavily traveled corridor. Drainage, looks like one person identified as a concern, noise, and then there were a few others. So please make sure to put those in the chat if you would like to share those with us. For traffic, with this development, the good news for your neighborhood is that there would be no direct connection to the internal roads of Charleston Crossing. That would just not be feasible with the way that it's been built out. But of course, if there's any additional residential development on this parcel, that does add extra cars to the road, but this is a dense area of our downtown district. So our engineering team works with a private consultant, A&F Engineering, to look at traffic, and we make sure that if there's any right-of-way improvements that are needed, that those are made to 116th Street. And then additionally, developments are subject to road impact fees. So they do have fees associated with the traffic that they're anticipated to generate for any new development. And so that's something that we would also calculate with this property.
One thing that I'll add to, Megan, with the previous development that's now not moving forward any longer, there had been plans put in place based off of an initial study from that development of improvements of the right or of the intersection and traffic signal at Mapledale and 116th Street. So most likely we would anticipate some additional signal or intersection improvements with whatever eventually occurs on this site.
Thank you. Yeah, great thing to highlight for any of that additional traffic signal. And if that's needed for this new development, I mean, that's certainly something that we would, we work with our A&F Engineering, like I mentioned, to put those improvements in.
I think there were some questions or comments, I should say, about drainage. And I think maybe it's important to note that any drainage standards that would be put in place today for this development are significantly different than when the original homes in Mapledale were built. In fact, I would assume that when the homes were built in Mapledale, there was no stormwater ordinance at a local level in Fishers. There might have been some county regulations, but they have to exceed a significantly higher standard in terms of their ability to detain water on site, the amount that they can release into any ongoing drainage infrastructure downstream. So in reality, there should be an improvement in the standards anyways in regard to drainage moving forward. And that would all get vetted through the TAC process that Megan mentioned earlier.
There was something in here as well related to drainage about impervious surface concerns and the development there. And Megan, do you want to address how the nickel plate code and our UDO looks at impervious surface and what people could expect there?
Yeah, so we have limitations on the impervious surface coverage in the village center. I believe it's a 75% coverage. And then additionally, we have separate stormwater standards that have to be met. And so that would also be related to the amount of impervious surface coverage. And depending on that percentage, that really dictates the detention that would be required for any new development. And so we make sure that any of that hard surface and the rainwater is getting captured in the appropriate way.
I think on here, from the poll results, there's some additional comments in here about signals and needing to be cognizant of the minimum doesn't always fit the residents' needs. So again, what Mayor Fadness and Megan had shared earlier is that our intention is that we continue to have these conversations with you all, that we keep you aware of when a potential project is moving forward, and getting your feedback and input to make sure that we can address everything the best that we can. So for those who are reiterating on the traffic signals, we will definitely take that back and make sure that's something that's properly addressed. In the Q&A for the concerns, there are also noise is one of these, but then in the Q&A in the chat section, I think it corresponds with concerns over density and density related noise.
So in the nickel plate district, it's subject to the same noise ordinance that any residential property is subject to in Fishers. And so anything that went in here, those residents would be held to the same standards that the residents of Charleston Crossing are held to today.
There was a comment made, and I think it's an appropriate one. And the question was, well, why wouldn't we line up the road with Holland Drive for signalization? And the original project that we were contemplating did that. And to go out on a limb here, I would tell you that engineering under any plan that would probably come forward would almost certainly require or strongly recommend that those roads line up, because I'm not a traffic engineer, but sitting here, obviously, if we can move that in and out traffic to the stoplight, that's what we should be doing from a safety perspective. So I think you can anticipate more than likely any development that comes forward would likely line up that access point, because that's like fundamentally good planning and traffic management moving forward.
And then with the population density, again, the comment was made about 190 homes where previously 16 were provided. And then there's also something in here, Mayor, about the ownership versus rental related to density as well.
Well, yeah, great questions. And I think there's more opportunity today to look at a less dense project and the opportunity for home ownership in the project. So I think if you want to think about bookends, where we had 12 homes built in the 70s and 80s in a very different development plan, different site plan, and then we had the denser kind of multifamily urban feel that we had gotten approved a couple of years ago, I think where we're going to land is somewhere in between those two bookends. And that to me affords us a lot of opportunity to get creative about well, what are some types of home ownership that could be really interesting in this project? How do you create a neighborhood feel that doesn't feel as dense as, say, walking down to like where the depot is and the new stuff on North Street? That's what I think over time we can really work through so that it really does feel like a continuation of a neighborhood feel to it. That to me is probably where this project tends to lend itself to. But I don't think anyone, I mean, I want to cast out exactly what's going to happen because I don't know, but I would be very shocked if we came back to you with a project that had similar density or greater density than what was already approved. I think what we're saying is, hey, we heard residents, we attempted to do that project and none of us felt really great about it at the end of the day. And so now we're rethinking it and we want to bring it more in line with what the neighborhood feel is around it.
And I think there's another question that came in about someone who had joined a little bit later about noise concerns. And again, there are noise standard requirements that must be met. But I think that when we look at the potential buffering that could be put here, the buffering and creating that additional barrier between the existing homes in Charleston Crossing and this future development is something that will be top of mind. And it was something that we were strong advocates for before. And I believe when some of you had met with J.C. Hart and talked about what that a mound or fence would look like, plus landscaping, those would certainly be things that we take into consideration. And again, since we're looking at less dense residential here now instead of apartments or multifamily, I think that the concern of lots of traffic or some sort of loud or intense retail or commercial use, hopefully that offsets any of the concerns on that one. Again, something related to the traffic taking shortcuts through Charleston Crossing was another concern that was just submitted.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there are people taking shortcuts through Charleston Crossing. I don't know that they would be related to this development site. Like as I look at Charleston Crossing, there was never an intention to connect Charleston Crossing to this project. So unless someone is coming down Hague Road and then cutting through Charleston Crossing to avoid 116th, that would be the only scenario, I guess, where I could see that potentially occurring. But we're actually studying all of 116th Street right now to understand signal timings and how we can improve those. And that's an ongoing opportunity for us to frankly get better and alleviate any kind of concerns in that regard.
So they're kind of, I think, on the tail of the commercial use and the noise related to it. A chat comment was submitted about the possibility of businesses being added or mixed use. We would love a walkable small grocery, something that's not huge that you don't have to drive to, like a corner grocery store. And I think, Megan, within the existing zoning of the village center, that would be a permitted use, correct?
So mixed use buildings, so if there was a residential component, would be a permitted use, but a standalone commercial building is not permitted by right.
And again, I think Megan Baumgartner said something earlier. I don't want to set in stone anything that like, oh, there'll be no opportunity for multifamily or no opportunity for retail. I think what I'm trying to communicate is that the scale that we were talking about before was far denser and far bigger than what I think we're going to end up doing here. I think it's going to feel like a neighborhood. And to the resident who wrote in about like a walkable coffee shop or a little restaurant or anything like that, I don't think we should preclude ourselves from contemplating those things because I still feel like that fits in line with a neighborhood. But what it isn't is a 5-story building with retail on the first floor, like we see just down the street. I don't believe that that's a good fit in this area.
With that, Mayor, a comment did just come in about the vertical story and height limits. And Megan, can you talk a little bit what that standard is?
Yeah, so for any single family home, it would be limited to 35 feet. And then if there was going to be a multifamily or mixed use component to this, I believe it would be limited to 42 feet in height. And so
Is that about 3 stories?
yeah, about 3 stories, correct.
Within the design and UDO standards, Megan, there was a question that came in about wheelchair accessible sidewalks and what this development or connectivity within this development would look like. Can you talk about those standards?
Yeah, so any new pedestrian facility is required to be ADA accessible. And the plan reviewer for our downtown district is actually our ADA coordinator as well. And it's something that he closely looks at. And so certainly any pedestrian amenities within this development would be ADA accessible.
And I saw the comment about Trader Joe's, and honestly, I think it's outside of a Chick-fil-A in Fishers, it's probably the most popular request that we get. And Megan Baumgartner would single-handedly be very, very excited about getting a Trader Joe's. But I'm not sure that we have an opportunity at them. They don't expand very often.
No. There have been a couple of questions about the green space and why it couldn't just be a park, or opportunities for open spaces and gathering here. Mayor, I don't know if you would like to take that one, or
Yes.
Mayor Megan.
No, I mean, I think there's opportunity to incorporate green space in this area, but the idea that this would all be in kind of urban park, I don't think is financially appropriate or a sound investment for the city in the long term. That doesn't mean that we can't incorporate thoughtful green space and gathering areas in it. It's a pretty big site. It's got quite a bit of acreage when you think about more of an urban center or urban development. And so I think if we look at a less dense environment, we can definitely get creative about, interesting green space and amenities. But the idea that the whole thing would be a park, from a policy perspective, I don't think that would be likely or in the best interest for the collective for our city.
On that note, there was a question that came in about enough residential, or I'm sorry, about enough commercial development throughout the rest of the city. Sorry, I just had a couple of these come through. And again, I think with that one, Mary, you kind of had addressed that one. Sorry, I'm managing all of these. Oh, so it was about Fishers has plenty of tax revenue and too many apartments. So I think to the point of being responsible with the site.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are trying to be responsible and think creatively about what the right development here is. Obviously, people can have their opinions about generally what they think the city has too much of or too little of, and certainly appreciate those comments. What we're really trying to do here is just collaborate on what is possible and what can live, simultaneously together and really be accretive to the whole area. And we think there's an opportunity to do that.
There was a comment in here of us, and I think it was from the individual who, hopefully you got my message, whoever the iPhone user is on here, to contact me directly, so we can have any sort of follow-up conversations. But the mayor shared earlier on that we absolutely do not have any sort of plans that are in place with this site and this location. And just wanted to clarify that point again, since there was a question about that.
Someone wrote in here about, they'd be interested in kind of residential, maybe a little bit of retail, but didn't want 3 stories. And I think because of privacy issues, and that is one thing I think we're all very sensitive to, is the backyards of folks that live directly adjacent to this area. So, I think there's creative ways to design it in a way that you wouldn't have someone staring out of their top floor looking directly down on you. We're sensitive to that. We would definitely in the plan process want to make sure that that wasn't an issue. And I think that goes to maybe a little bit of Megan's comments about buffering earlier. You know, there's one thing to buffer with landscaping. It's another thing to think about the site plan holistically and go, hey, does it make sense to put our tallest buildings adjacent to someone's backyard? Or does it make more sense to walk some of the taller buildings, if there is a 3-story building, up towards 116th Street and leave the more residential or home feel closer to those neighbors? And I think, you know, I think that's, we're all aligned in those interests.
I haven't seen any additional questions or items pop up in the chat. Oh, this had come up earlier. The negative impact on home values. And so I mean, I believe that we have information to be able to demonstrate that denser residential, regardless of for sale or for rent, can actually increase home value. So we're happy to try and share that. And I'll be sure to post my email address in here for anyone who has follow-up questions or would like additional information regarding what we discussed tonight.
Well, and I think to that point, and really thinking through and being thoughtful about what we could develop here, that does a couple things. I think one is accretive to the overall area, that, you know, it's a neighborhood that people would be proud of and be proud to say they're adjacent to. That's in the interest of everyone. We want to see that occur just as much as you do. We want those homes to drive values up for everyone around it. And I don't think that's a zero-sum game. I think through the right type of planning, the right type of development, the right type of vision, I think that's very achievable. And the good news is now we have kind of control of that, so we can take our time and really, you know, be creative and come up with something that ultimately not only is good for quote unquote downtown development, but really it's good for the entire area and drives values hopefully up for folks.
Yeah, and that's something we hear a lot too on the property values. And I would just like to reiterate that, you know, we have that same interest in mind as well. So we're aligned in maintaining and increasing property values for all residents. And so we would be mindful of that in the site plan design as well.
There was a comment that came through of the single family residences similar to the Gradison homes at Morgan and Lantern would be attractive and not drastically increase the population density. And that certainly is an area that we've talked about.
Yeah, we're big fans of what Gradison has done in that area. Those are very, very nice homes. I mean, I think some of them are selling between $700,000 and $900,000. It's denser, right? They're closer together, but done in a thoughtful way, and they're beautiful homes. And so those are options. But we got to find the right partner to potentially do something like that. And the interest rate environment that I think everyone finds themselves in right now makes it a little difficult as opposed to, like, let's say a year and a half ago. But certainly that single family residential is something that we like a lot of what's happening just down the street from this project.
There's a comment that was posted in the chat about gouged on taxes and the funding going towards the developer.
Which one is that?
On the webinar chat.
Try to keep up with.
I know.
Gouged on taxes and given to developers. Let me see here. Can you just read it aloud so that I can kind of answer it?
Yeah, I have been gouged on taxes and want to know how much TIF is going to the developers. My neighbor had seen the video about the developer wanting Mapledale when he was on the Fishers Town Council before the city was incorporated. You have wiped out all of the green space and continue to saturate even with COVID. People are not meant to live stacked up on each other.
Well, there's a lot there to unpack. So I'm not sure about what video he's referring to, but in terms of development and gouging residents, we've actually reduced our tax rate the last 3 years in a row here at the city. And to the conversation about home values, The reason people's actual tax payment has gone up to some degree is that assessed values and home values have actually been climbing at kind of historic rates at all price points, whether you're talking about the high-end homes in Fishers or the medium value homes in Fishers. They've all been rising, which is a good problem to have. It's been an attractive community for people to want to move into. In terms of economic development incentives, we actually believe that by growing more assessed value in our city, that spreads the cost burden of operating a city much further. And it allows us to, again, as we grow our assessed value, lower those tax rates on individuals. So growth for the sake of growth isn't necessarily a good thing. Smart growth done in a way that allows us to alleviate some of the cost burden on residents, I think is the appropriate approach moving forward. And, we're really here tonight to talk about collaborating on what this could be collectively together. In terms of density and how people are crammed on top of one another, if you look at actually some of the most dense residential developments in Fishers are actually some of them that were built some time ago. Even if we're looking at the image that we're looking at here, Charleston Crossing and a lot of other places are actually fairly dense neighborhoods. And so, and they're wonderful neighborhoods. So I think if we do them well and we plan them well and we're thoughtful about green space and connectivity, there's no reason why those neighborhoods aren't just as viable as any other.
A question came in about one-story retirement community type of development with patio homes, pretty quiet and useful to the Fishers community.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a possibility. Those cottage homes, we know that seniors are, as the baby boomer generation moves out of their larger homes, they want walkability and they want low maintenance. And so is there an opportunity for some sort of empty nester product in some aspect of this development? I think that's certainly on the table for a project here. Like I said, I don't want to rule anything out in that regard. If it's residential in nature and lower in density than what we were originally talking, I think all of those things are on the table for discussion and consideration.
A comment came in again on the chat regarding the wanting to drive down 116th and see something inviting and beautiful. So I think we're aligned on that, and how that site plan goes together and what you see from 116th Street. I think we're all very similarly aligned on that. Again, to the individual it's just showing as iPhone, I've tried to send my email address to you and we've posted that in the chat, but I can also put my cell phone number in here if you'd prefer to just give me a call tomorrow. I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation. Okay. Along the same lines as empty nesters, tiny homes are becoming desirable. And I think that again goes to this option of density and all things that we'll consider and look at in the site.
Yeah.
Oh, good, Scott.
I see the comment about walkability and access. I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think our intent would be, you almost want kind of this, if you're going to have any kind of retail there, you almost want it to be kind of the neighborhood's retail, right? It's not where someone from, the east side of Fishers is going to drive to and cause congestion, but rather it feels more like, hey, this is Charleston Crossing or Sunblest. If we live in those neighborhoods, this is our hangout. This is our spot. And I think if I were looking at retail, that would be the kind of retail I think we'd want to find, is that really kind of neighborhood feel. And so that's what we've always envisioned, is like on the east side of I-69 with the yard. It's a great project. It's exciting. Lots of people want to go there. It's wonderful. That's a very different feel than what we're trying to do in downtown Fishers. And we want to make that about, for lack of a better term, that's townies. That's where people who are local, who live there, who call that home, we want that kind of accessibility. And so if we were going to do retail, I'd want to be very, very careful that it fits that neighborhood feel.
So we had another comment, and I've seen a couple of these regarding dog parks. Again,
I think dog parks are very popular. I think you'd want to be very careful as a neighbor to it in a dense urban area, whether you want that amount of dog traffic and dog noise in close proximity. We are evaluating building dog parks in the city, but when we do that, and what we're doing currently is we're trying to find locations, frankly, that wouldn't be an adverse impact on residents that live in that area. You know, you can imagine if you have your own dog in your backyard and you're adjacent to a dog park, if your dog is barking constantly because they hear 42 other dogs out barking and being around each other, and then parking for that dog park as well can be pretty significant. So I would echo the sentiments of a lot of people on here that we need the public dog parks in Fishers. We're underserved in that area. I just would want to do it in a way that doesn't adversely impact any current residents that call that area home.
The individual said, good point, you're right on that, with an LOL. Okay, for the individual on the iPhone, I'd sent through the chat my email address and phone number. So hopefully that has come through. Mayor Fadness, I don't see any of, reiteration of not wanting to destroy or change the neighborhood feel.
I'm in complete alignment with the person saying they don't want to be Carmel. Never wanted to be Carmel, not interested in being Carmel, want to be uniquely Fishers. We don't have a plan to create a metropolis here. Do we want an urban walkable area? Do we want places where people can go access retail? You got to have people that live nearby the retail to support it. And so you do have to have a degree of people living and working in close proximity. Proud of the downtown that we have to date, but like the idea that we're going to go in and redevelop all of downtown or Old Town Fishers just isn't reality. Here, I think we just really have a great opportunity to create a neighborhood hangout in a neighborhood that's adjacent to it. So really, I'm kind of excited, frankly, about reimagining this. And I think it affords us a great opportunity.
Great. So Megan's contact information and mine is posted in the chat. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us.
Would you throw my email on there too, Megan, if you could?
Sure.
I know the anonymous person has a lot of concerns and questions and opinions, and I certainly want to make myself available for any follow-up comments that they have, and really anyone else that's on there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't put that out there to everybody. Okay, well, for anyone who has neighbors, nearby people who are also interested in this, we are recording it. This will be shared and posted. So we will make sure that everyone gets this. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will be in touch with you.
Megan, before everyone leaves me real quick, maybe we should just set maybe an update, 2-3 months out. Like if we don't have anything concrete to talk about, we could still have another Zoom call a couple months from now just to stay in touch. Like, let's just go ahead and schedule it here in the next few weeks so that and maybe it's a 10-minute conversation saying, hey, we haven't really talked to any developers, don't have anything new, but I just don't want to have a scenario where we don't talk for 7 months and then all of a sudden there's a project. So maybe we just set a routine cadence of keeping people posted.
Yes. We will definitely do that.
Great. Well, I appreciate everyone being on here. I also would just say David Giffel is your city council member. He's on here tonight, and he's out and about a lot. And if you can't get a hold of any of us, which I'm sure you can, but If not, feel free to reach out to David. He's got his ear open and wants to hear from his residents as well. And hey, we look forward to working with you on this project over the next couple of months. Breathe easy. There isn't any construction imminently occurring on this project, and I think we got a second chance here to do something really great.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.